I once had advice in terms of, I was asking various different successful people, what should I do with my life? And the feedback that I got was do something that even if no one paid you to do it, you would still do it. And for me, that's been the most powerful advice. It's like, ultimately, if I never make a dime off of doing the things that I do, would I spend my time doing them? The answer is yes.
Welcome to the Business for Good podcast, a show where we spotlight companies making money by making the world a better place. I'm your host, Paul Shapiro, and if you share a passion for using commerce to solve many of the world's most pressing problems, then this is the show for you. Welcome, friends, to the 35th episode of Business for Good. Wow, was the last feedback on the last episode with Arturo Elizondo from Clara Foods overwhelming. It is great to hear from so many listeners about how inspirational Arturo's story is, and I can assure you, friends, this conversation with Ryan Bethencourt is another one that will light a fire for many of you listeners. As you'll hear in the episode, Ryan is in many ways an OG of the alt protein scene. In fact, he was a co-founder of Indiebio, the biotech accelerator, which wrote the first ever investor check to Clara Foods, along with first checks for numerous other now big names in the space, from Memphis Meats to Geltor and more, all of which Ryan and I discuss in this conversation. In addition to his pioneering work to incubate and fund companies seeking to create more sustainable protein sources, Ryan is now the co-founder of his own startup, Wild Earth, which makes a healthier, clean protein dog food that's attracted big-name investors like Peter Thiel and Mark Cuban, earning a total of $16 million in investment so far in the company's 2-year history. In this episode, we talk about what it was like for Ryan to go on Shark Tank, including what techniques he used to keep calm to win an unlikely investment. We also discuss how Ryan's childhood love of both sci-fi and animals forged into one path as an adult, leading him to make early bets on crazy ideas like growing meat and eggs outside of animals long before it was cool, and of course, eventually to starting his own company. So enjoy this wide-ranging and fascinating conversation with a real pioneer in the alternative protein world. And if you listen to the very end, you may even get to hear my reaction to eating some of Ryan's new dog food. Without further ado, I give you Ryan Bethencourt. Ryan, welcome to the Business for Good podcast.
Thank you, Paul. It's great to be here with you after so long. I know we've been looking forward to having this conversation for a while.
I especially have been looking forward to it, but it's so cool to be in the Wild Earth HQ, which is a beautiful headquarters. So congratulations.
Thank you.
It looked to me like you must have about 20 people working here right now.
And that's that's exactly accurate. In fact, it is exactly 20 people. Yeah.
Amazing. I mean, this company is really not that old and you're already at 20 people. Yeah. So you must be doing something right, or at least your investors think so.
Hopefully so. Okay. So hopefully our customers think that, right? So,
yeah, for sure. For sure. It's always better to raise money from customers than from investors. So let's go back though, before you were the CEO of this startup that is really seeming to catch fire, because people know Ryan Bethencourt now. They might know you as Ryan, the guy who is on Shark Tank. Yeah. They might know you as the guy who's in the prolific Facebook ads of you eating the bowl of dog food, which I have seen dozens and dozens of times. It's a good ad. In fact, I want to eat some dog food while I'm here, so I can.
We'll do that.
Okay,
we'll set you up with some dog food.
Okay, good, very good. I have tried the dog treats when they first came out. You generously sent me some, and I fed them to my wife's parents' dogs, and they definitely liked them. But I tried them too.
We're gonna get you a whole bag of Wild Earth. So.
Very good. Good. I won't have to buy food for the next week. But let's go back to the beginning.
Yeah.
Because you have a strong interest in biotech now.
Yeah.
But what got you interested in that in the first place? Were you always somebody who cared about using science to make the world a better place? Was it that you just had an interest in science? Like, what was it for you?
Yeah, it was always an interest in science.
Okay.
So it really started off with, I'm from Miami. My mother actually got me into science fiction. And one of the things that she wanted me to read more. And so she found like great science fiction books. And so she basically got me a whole bunch of like Isaac Asimov, Robert Heinlein, like all these classics of science fiction, Ursula Le Guin. And that really stoked my interest and my curiosity about science. Like the world we exist in today, how we understand it, and how human technology since literally the invention of fire, how we have used as a species, technology to advance ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So it was the love of science that really got me into the world of biotech.
Now, you're a child reading all this sci-fi?
Yeah, I was a child. Yeah, I was probably 10 years old reading science fiction.
Yeah. And so at that time, though, I presume your interest was far from trying to help the environment or to help animals. That all came later for you.
Yeah, I had no idea. Right. It was literally, I was like, this is crazy. I love these stories. Is any of this real? Like that was, it got me thinking. And it was like, some of this stuff seems kind of real. Like, could we build it? And, it was just incredible to see that some of these science fiction authors actually were prophesizing the future.
Right. Yeah. If you go back, I mean, even to like the Star Trek series, like the whole idea of the replicator was essentially cultured meat. Yeah. Right. I mean, like they had cultivated meat on the ship and they just didn't call it that. They just, said it was like food from the replicator, but that's basically it.
Yeah. Only the Klingons ate live food. And that's because that was part of their tradition. Everyone else just replicated it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So. Yeah. There's a great scene that I'm sure you have seen where one of the, I don't know if it was a Klingon, but it was some non-human who was like shocked because he had seen humans eating meat. And they said, no, like, we're not barbaric. We don't do that. Like, this is how we do it. Yeah. It's pretty cool to think about how that is now becoming reality.
Yeah. Finally.
And in fact, interestingly, the first, the first cultivated meat ever grown was in NASA-funded research. The whole idea
was the goldfish. Right?
Yeah,
it was goldfish meat.
Yeah,
actually, one of the entrepreneurs at Indiebio, Alan Perlstein, he was actually part of that.
Wow.
He was actually that was actually his project. He was a research student back then.
Amazing.
On that.
That's so cool. Yeah, it was about 20 years ago, and it was in New York, and there was a lot of news attention on that. And that's what led many of the early pioneers in this field to think it's cool, but why do this for space? Like, we need this here on Earth. Mm-hmm. Like, this isn't something that we want in space. We need this here. So in many ways, that's led to those people thinking that. In many ways, led to us sitting here right now.
And in fact, I know that it was for Finless Foods, for the co-founders, for Mike and Brian at Finless. This was actually literally an inspiration. They read that paper, and that led them to start thinking about what could they do for the oceans.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah. That's really cool. So help us then. So you're 10 years old, Ryan, and you have this interest in sci-fi. At what point do you then gain the interest in having a love for animals? Because I know it started pretty young for you, right? It started
very young for me. So I grew up with animals. Back when I was a kid, I mean, we had many dogs, many cats. At one point, a monitor lizard. I don't know if that was legal at the time. It's definitely not legal now. Parakeets, parrots, all sorts of snakes, lizards. And so in Miami, it was just kind of a tropical environment. There were just animals everywhere. And so I really grew up with, now in reflection, it's like a real appreciation for other minds, for others other than us. And I didn't realize I didn't know that's where it would take me. But I just remember just how fascinated I was by how all these different beings interacted with me, with each other. They were clearly intelligent. And so that was something that I had a love for animals. And I've talked about this a couple of times. What stopped me from eating meat anymore was actually, we went to celebrate at the time my dad's birthday, and he went and got a freshly slaughtered pig, and I saw them kill the pig, and it just felt totally and utterly wrong to me. I actually stopped eating pork that day, and then I started to wake up to the realities of like modern factory farming, which was just something that just blew my mind. That here I was with all of these animals who I cared about, I loved about, I played with, I spent time with, and here we were, harming and hurting other animals. I wasn't limited to dogs and cats. I literally spent time with all sorts of animals. And it was something that I didn't understand why we were doing it, why I was doing it. And so I slowly started to realize I had to stop eating animals.
How old were you then?
That was, again, about 12 years old.
Right. So at that time, though, you had a love of sci-fi, you had a love of animals, but you were not connecting the two at that point, right?
No, not yet. So these were separate journeys. My mother actually introduced me to a short story from Ursula Le Guin. And I don't know if you're familiar with the story, but it's basically, oh my goodness, now I'm blanking on the actual It's those who walk away from Omelas. And so those who walk away from Omelas was a short story, and I won't ruin it. But it basically was about this perfect society where there was something dark within that society that no one ever talked about, but they had to see it at least once. I highly recommend it. It's a very short story. And that short story woke me up.
Wow, we'll definitely include that in the show notes.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds me a little bit of the reaction that I had to reading Isaac Bashevis Singer's story, The Slaughterer. Did you ever hear that?
I know, I have not.
It's also a very short story. It probably takes maybe 15, 20 minutes to read. But, Singer was a Holocaust survivor who ended up winning the Nobel Prize in Literature. And he wrote a lot of really fantastic novels, but this is just a short story, which is about basically somebody who really against his will gets brought in to become a slaughterer for this village. And I won't ruin everything, but the ghosts of the animals start hunting him. And it really, it really explores the complicated relationship that we have with other animals and some of the more troubling aspects of it. But anyway, both of those will be included in the show notes. I too have a love of sci-fi. I too have a love of literature. So, I definitely am going to read this story.
And I know we share that, Paul. I know we share that love of science and sci-fi and literature. Interesting enough, now I've gotten more into history as well.
Cool.
So that's been something like history, weirdly reading about wars as well, generals and things that I was never interested in before.
Yeah, well, our mutual friend Josh Balk highly recommends Ron Chernow's book on Grant. Which is, it's a lengthy tome, but I now know many people who have recommended this book to me. Not only Josh Balk, but also my coworker, Donnie Kirkendall's father, Jay Kirkendall, read it and recommended it to me.
I'm going to read it.
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to read it.
Grant is an interesting guy because, this is a guy who really had a lot of ups and downs in his life. Like this guy was down and then, becomes like one of the generals who Lincoln appoints because nobody else is doing a good job, makes him general. And the press was excoriating him. He was doing a bad job. Everybody was saying that he should be fired or he should resign. People are calling on Lincoln to get rid of him. And, he goes on to win the war and become president himself.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a real example of somebody who was down and then up. It's very inspirational.
And I often wonder about that, right? It's like, are heroes born in the fire, right? It's kind of like in the darkest hours, that's when you truly see what someone is, right? And so I actually read Abraham Lincoln's Team of Rivals.
Oh, yeah.
And you can
Doris
see that
Kearns, good one.
Doris Kearns, yep. Superb book. And you can see that.
Yeah, well, there's a great quote from Grant that is not exactly on this, but he says, he's talking about, this is later in his autobiography after he's had the ups and the downs and the ups again. And he says, this is a direct quote. He says, "The friend in my adversity I shall always cherish most. I can better trust those who help to relieve the gloom of my dark hours than those who are so ready to enjoy with me the sunshine of my prosperity."
Beautiful.
And it's a good reminder that if you know somebody who is down, that's when they need you as a friend.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to be somebody's friend when they're up, but when they're down, it's a really great time to ensure that you're there for them as a friend.
100%, my friend. 100%.
Very good.
So,
all right. So bring me up, Ryan. So get to the point in your story where you start connecting these two and you start thinking that maybe there's a way that you can use this interest and love of science to actually do something for animals.
So fast forward, I went to university, studied, got my degrees in biology and in business. And I started working in the pharmaceutical industry and biotech industry, developing human therapeutics. I became kind of unhappy with what I saw, which was that we were moving forward so glacially in the world of biotechnology, and we're doing so little in other areas outside of human therapeutics. And then the financial crash came, the great, the recession in 2008, and that led to what's now called the biohacker movement. So where myself and many others actually started to build little biotech labs in their kitchens, living rooms, garages. That led to a whole bunch of biohacker spaces and a community, both in the Silicon Valley, Los Angeles, and in New York and globally. And at the time, I was one of the few people who's actually working in the commercial biotech industry. And I suddenly realized, I was like, wait a minute, people in tech can build for not much money, they can build companies, they can build startups that go on to become Facebooks. why can't we do that in biology and biotech? If you had the basic equipment, couldn't you, as someone that understood biotech and biology, make a startup out of that? And I started going down that path. Myself and many others co-founded Counterculture Labs, which is a biohacker space in Oakland. And then I started Berkeley Biolabs, and I'm trying to fast forward through all of these things. And myself and my co-founder, Ron Shigeta, we both invested our own money in starting this little biotech incubator that no one cared about on the outskirts of Berkeley, except a couple of really great angel investors who backed us, which I'll forever be grateful for that. And then eventually we came across the team at SOS Ventures, and together we started Indiebio. Indiebio was really a combination of many of these different concepts and ideas around low-cost biotech, helping people go from idea to proof of concept. It became very clear that entrepreneurs needed not just a space, which we built with Berkeley Biolabs, but they needed money too. And that was one of my biggest frustrations with Berkeley Biolabs. We had space and scientists could work on their projects on weekends and evenings, but they couldn't afford to give up their day jobs. And so we started Indiebio, backed by SOS Ventures. And it was myself, it was Arvind, and it was Ron. And we started helping entrepreneurs, scientists become entrepreneurs. One of my deep insights, and actually, Josh Tetrick was a friend of mine back then, kind of blew my mind. When he got his first $500K check from Vinod Khosla, I suddenly realized I'd become a vegan. I'd been plant-based vegan. I became a vegan because of, it was an ethical thing for me. The environmental and the health came later. But for me, it was just, seeing how animals were mistreated in factory farms. I just couldn't, I could no longer, even though I love the taste of steak and meat and all that other good stuff, I just couldn't get myself to support an industry which ethically I was against. And so I'd gone vegan. Now it's been about a decade. And I was like, this is strange. I may have an opportunity to use science, plus the fact that, I believe that factory farms should end, that we shouldn't be using animals, sentient beings, for food, and then combine these two things. And so, I was introduced by Isha Datar at New Harvest to Arturo at what became Clara Foods. That's the recombinant, it's a very successful recombinant egg company. So they make eggs, but without the chickens. They brew them in engineered yeast.
Yes, and Arturo was the last guest on this show. So for people who listen to the show, if you didn't hear the last episode, go back and listen to Arturo's great interview.
Yeah. So suddenly I realized, definitely thanks to Josh, there was stuff bubbling up with Beyond and Impossible. Back then, it's hard to remember because I don't know if you remember the chicken strips.
Oh, yeah.
Beyond chicken strips. They were good, but they weren't, significantly better than like Boca Burger or whatever else, but something was happening.
Yeah, they were good for vegetarians.
Yeah.
They weren't necessarily fooling any meat eaters.
No, it was kind of like if you closed your eyes and imagine you were eating a chicken tender, maybe a little bit more of a slippery chicken tender, like you were almost there.
You got to really cover it or deep fry it or something. Yeah. No, they were good. I liked them.
Me too. I love them too, but I was a vegetarian at that point too. So I was like, it's close enough to meat. I'm good. We hadn't seen the revolution that we've seen now in plant-based meats, which, Beyond's is superb. Impossible is superb. I'm a huge fan of both companies and both founders, both the Browns. And so, it became very clear to me. I was like, wait a minute, all this science fiction that I read, and this was something that was going on in my mind, we can actually make real. So lab-grown meat, using biotech to make bioidentical products.
Yeah. And Indiebio, has come to incubate some of the most important companies. Big names now are companies that you originally funded. So
exactly.
Memphis Meats, Geltor, Clara Foods, and the list goes on.
The Knot company down across Latin America.
Yeah.
So that I'm particularly proud of that one because at the time people thought it was crazy. They were like, oh, this is just a US thing. And I was like, no, this is really a global thing. and we backed Matthias from Notco.
Yeah.
We were his first investors for the Not company as well.
That's really cool. So recently, Ryan, there was a Bloomberg article profiling you, basically saying that there's basically not as much attention on Latino entrepreneurs as there ought to be. There's the central argument. Yet it seems to me like you being a Latino yourself is why you're the profile of this article. But when you bring in people like Arturo and Matthias and others, like, has that been a special focus for you, or has that just happened to be coincidental?
It hasn't, but the way that I view things is that, and from the beginning of when we started Indiebio, the focus was always, and this is my personal focus as well as I think the entire team's focus, we always back diversity of thought. And so when you're looking for diversity of thought, it's actually, it's powerful to look for people that are different in every way. And so for me, I was always looking for difference rather than sameness. The pattern, it was kind of flipped. Pattern recognition the other way around. And I realized that at that earliest stage, we would have to help these founders essentially co-found their companies to build them from the ground up. Many of these companies literally had tissue paper with some notes.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I was so impressed by your work at Indiebio about, was that you had these people who were scientists and they had a really cool idea, but they had no idea how to start a company.
No.
And they would have no idea how to run a company.
Yeah.
And you came in and helped them. So let's just take, the most successful of these companies, really, which I would presume is Memphis Meats. They just raised 161 million Series B. But you were their first check, right?
Yep.
I mean, they,
that's exactly right.
My recollection when I was interviewing you for the book Clean Meat was that Uma emailed you and you responded within like an hour, right?
It was actually, I think it was, so again, Isha turns up again from New Harvest. And Isha connected me to Uma, and she said, there's this really brilliant professor with a really brilliant scientist in his lab. They're working on smooth muscle cells. And at the time, I think they were mostly focused on human heart. Uma, many people don't know this, but Uma is a medical doctor and a professor.
He is a cardiologist.
Cardiology, right? He was head of his department. And
they should know that if they've read Clean Meat.
They should know that. They should have read Clean Meat, especially if they're listening to your podcast. Highly recommend it, by the way. It's a great book, probably the best in documenting the historical aspects of this industry.
That's very nice of you.
So Isha connected us, and I can't remember exactly how Uma and I connected, whether it was by email or text message. Could well have been email, but it was very quick. The fact that he was working on Clean Meat was something that was on my wish list. I actually tried to convince Mark Post to start a company. And so I actually Mark Post was very gracious, very, very nice guy. I like him a lot. He set up a Skype call at the time. We didn't have Zoom back then. And he was like, look, I have guaranteed money when I'm ready to start a company. I want to do it very methodically and I want to do it right. And at the time I was like, look, we have all of this money. We have $200K to offer you. And I was very excited because our first batch of companies, we only had $50K, and we were able to increase it to $200K per company. And, it just wasn't an exciting number for Mark, and he wanted to do it correctly. And so by the time Isha connected me to Uma, I knew that we were at a very unique moment in time where I felt that science could really be transformed if we embraced the entrepreneurial spirit, right? The science of clean meat. And so she connected me to Uma. Uma and I talked, and Uma saw it very clearly. He was vegan from the beginning. He was a scientist. He saw clearly where the industry was going. And I was like, Uma, I think this is a historic moment in time. If you're the first to start a clean meat company focused exclusively on clean meat. There was actually a company prior to that, many years, that had attempted this, and we can talk a little bit about that. But this was really the first clean meat company that was focused just on making clean meat. And Uma agreed, and we cut a check with him, and we helped him get Memphis Meats off the ground.
And this is a really big gamble for him because, it's not like he was some young kid who was just starting out his career. He was a very successful cardiologist. He was like the head of the Minnesota Heart Association. Yep. He was about to enter into the most economically lucrative decade of his career in his 40s as a cardiologist. This is a really big gamble for somebody to take. And,
huge gamble, huge gamble. I mean, he saw clearly,
right? And
he saw that he had a unique moment in time, and that this could be, if it worked, would be historical.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
A historical moment. And to his credit, he took it. He left his job.
Yeah.
professor.
Well, to your credit for funding it. You know, I think about it, like nobody else had ever funded anything like this in the history of humanity. So
it was nuts, by the way. Everyone was like, "You are the most nuts guy I know. You're funding GMO egg whites, lab grown meats." And I was like, "Look, this is the future."
Yeah.
And one of the deep insights that I've always held is whenever I doubt myself, I always look back into the history of biology, into the history of our species. And *Sapiens*, very powerful book, which I know you and I both love.
Yeah, for sure.
And I know. And by the way, again, Clean Meat. Read the Clean Meat book. Yuval Harari actually wrote the.
He wrote the forward for the book,
which
many people have said is the best part of the book.
Amazing, loved it. Since the dawn of humanity, from fire forward, technology has always won. And so whenever there's been technology which is transformational, whether that's, and I know, Paul, you've spoken a lot about going from horse and buggy to automobiles, like we have, or whale blubber to electricity for lighting, like technology always wins. And so I was like, even though some people seem to have a yuck factor around this, technology will win. This is the right technology.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And, the reality is that if you have a food that tastes good and that is affordable, people are going to eat it. Now, it doesn't mean everybody is going to be first in line to eat it, but it does mean that people will eat it. And of course, it has to be safe. That's rule number one. Needless to say, it's not going to come onto the market if it's not safe. Yeah. But, presuming that it is shown to be safe and that it tastes good and that it's affordable, there's going to be a lot of people who are lining up to eat these foods. Yeah. And certainly you and I will be in that line.
Oh, for sure. And you and I have already eaten some of these foods.
Yeah,
so.
many times. Yeah. So how does it feel for you? I mean, you look back and you think about now there's literally hundreds of millions of dollars pouring into this space. Arturo at Clara Foods has brought in 50 million. Uma has now brought in somewhere closer to like 181 million total, I believe. Yeah. I'm not sure what Geltor has brought in, but surely it's tens of millions.
Yeah, 20 to 30 million at least. Yeah.
Yeah. So these companies that you help to incubate, and then you look at this space and you look back and you see all of this money pouring into it, that who knows how long it would have been delayed if you hadn't been willing to go out there and do this. Like, how do you feel looking back on this?
It kind of blows my mind, right? It was, you often, like, when I think about it, when I think about these now large companies, I think about the founders, the people themselves. Like I remember Nick and Alex from Geltor. I remember them at Princeton when we were talking. They're like, we have this idea and we think this will work. And now they're actually selling collagen, like non-animal derived collagen.
Amazing.
And so to me, it's I'm incredibly proud of the people. And that's something actually that I've loved. And I've realized, starting in obviously Wild Earth, I love helping people and developing people. That's something that as a manager, as you grow, you can be a really incredible manager if you love developing leaders.
So let's talk about them, because you had a shift in your career where you went from incubating other people's companies to actually founding your own. So tell me about that. Why did you do it and why pet food? Yeah.
So at the time, we'd been incredibly successful in Indiebio. It was actually probably one of the hardest things I've had to do. Leaving Indiebio in probably our most successful moments. We'd funded a whole bunch of companies. Probably a dozen plus future food companies, which are now pretty famous. That doesn't include the other therapeutic biomaterial companies and just really incredible founders that we'd worked with. In total, I've worked with hundreds of founders, over 80 biotech companies by the time I left Indiebio, which I was incredibly proud of all of them. Even the ones that failed, they tried hard to make their vision a reality. And I started to get the itch. I started to get the bug of building again. I basically would build with these founders. And after a while, it was like, I know how to get you from idea to seed funding. What I don't know how to do is I don't know how to help you scale. And I realized that started to become an issue. And in parallel, I had this idea that wouldn't go away. As a long-time animal lover, I'd grown up with tons of different animals, lots of pets. And I kept wondering, what am I feeding them when I'm feeding them this dog food, right? Or this cat food? We'd seen Impossible Foods, we'd seen Beyond Meat, we'd seen Memphis Meats, and now dozens of other clean meat companies and plant-based companies. And I didn't really see anyone doing this for the pet food industry. There was no Beyond Food, Impossible Foods, or Memphis Meats of pet food. And I kept trying to give this idea away. I was like, there's got to be someone else who's a better person to start a pet food company. I know nothing about the pet food industry. There has to be. I'm a biotech therapeutics and future of food guy. It was kind of like starting Indiebio or Berkeley Biolabs or Counterculture Labs. Sometimes things just don't exist, and you're the one that has to build it. If you see it in your mind's eye, that is your responsibility to try and build it. And so I went out and I said, okay, I think I'm going to have to build this company. And myself and my 3 other co-founders. So I actually left with Ron, who was my co-founder at Indiebio, to start it. Kristen Werman, who is also our co-founder, and Abril Estrada, who's actually our chief product officer. And I started to try and raise money. What was interesting is a lot of the VCs that I pitched in Silicon Valley knew me through my work with Indiebio. And they were like, hey, if you start a cancer company or if you start a human food company, I'll back you. If you start a pet food company, I won't. And so I got that literally from dozens of people, that response from dozens of people. And there were 3 investors, 3 great investors, and I'll always be thankful for them. So Lisa at Stray Dog Capital, Amy at Veg Invest, and then Sonia and Aiden at Felicis Ventures, who backed us.
So these are Lisa Faria, Amy Trakinski, and what's Sonia's last name?
And Sonia Arison. And Aiden Sencut. So they, between the 4 of them, they put the first $1 million into our company. And the vision was to make cleaner, more sustainable pet food. The more I started looking into pet food, the more messed up and broken I started to realize it actually was. So for those of us that love our animals, love our dogs, love our cats, we are feeding them contaminated meat. There's no other way to look at it. Their supply chain is totally and utterly broken. They are fed non-human grade meat. This is the meat that goes bad in grocery stores. The FDA has found that they are even throwing in the styrofoam and the plastic wrapping around those wrapped plastic meat, like minced meat. When that goes bad, that goes to the renderer. And the FDA has found that oftentimes they're throwing the plastic in with the old meat. And of course, as we know, burnt plastic is carcinogenic. There have been contaminated meats with euthanasia drug in them. We think it's probably at least euthanized horse, because you don't really euthanize farm animals. And this is happening like constantly. I think about a year ago, there were about 100 million units of dog food and cat food that were recalled because they had euthanasia drug. So the entire thing is broken. And on top of that, so there's the contaminated meat problem. On top of that, I didn't realize how much of a problem it was. So for those of us that not only care about the animals, but care about the environment, 25 to 30% of the meat we consume in the US goes to feed our pets. So 30%. So if you actually care about the environment and you're not looking at pet food, you're missing 30% of the problem.
So from an environmental perspective, it's obvious why you would want to do something like this. For a lot of pet parents, my guess is that they would hear what you're talking about the disgusting nature of much of the mainstream pet food, and they would think, I should, buy human grade meat instead.
Yes.
And you're saying the solution is instead, no, buy this plant-based dog food. So,
exactly.
So persuade them why they should do that.
Yeah. So plant-based dog food. So there is a common misconception around many people, including people who eat plant-based in many different ways, that dogs are carnivores. Mm-hmm. They're not. They're actually omnivores like us. And actually, when you look at the literature, so when you look at, I think there was a paper published in 2016 in Nature, which is one of the leading scientific journals, it actually highlights the evolution of dogs from wolves and how their biology has evolved to a more starch-based diet. And so and there are even some theories around the fact that dogs actually need more starch because they've co-evolved with us. And so since the agricultural revolution, dogs have been with us. They've been eating with us. And so it makes sense that actually they can survive and thrive on a plant-based diet. A lot of people ask for evidence of this. If you look at India, almost all of those dogs are actually vegetarian dogs.
That's funny.
Right? So literally an entire country.
The dal dogs.
Yes, the dal dogs, the chapati dogs. So dogs can survive and thrive. In fact, one of the best examples of this, and we're starting to see more and more examples of this, that dogs like us can do very, very well on a plant-based diet. It actually may be better for them. There was a dog called Bramble. I don't know if you're familiar with Bramble.
I am, but for those who aren't, tell us about Bramble.
Yeah, so Bramble, she was a dog that grew up eating lentils, rice, and nutritional yeast. By the way, Wild Earth actually does have yeast in it.
We're going to get to that.
Yes, we're going to get to that. And she lived to 27 years of age.
This is a French dog, right?
She was a collie. She was
I'm sorry, a dog in France.
Yeah, she was in the UK.
Oh, in the UK.
Yeah,
okay.
Yes. So Bramble was in the UK.
Okay.
She lived to 27 years of age. Just for those of you that are listening and not familiar with the average age of a dog, the average age of a dog is about 11.5 years.
The average lifespan of a dog.
Sorry, average lifespan of a dog is about 11.5 years.
Yeah.
Little dogs tend to live longer. Bigger dogs, unfortunately, tend to die a little sooner. It's mind-blowing that Bramble's lifespan was more than double.
Amazing. Mm-hmm. So, look, that's awesome. There's some anecdotal evidence that these dogs do well. But let's hear about what's actually in it, because you mentioned that there's yeast. But at first, at least, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, at first, the idea for Wild Earth was basically we're going to do a biotech type dog food,
correct,
right?
Yeah.
And you were growing koji, which is this fungus that, well, I'll let you tell the story, but you're growing koji, and tell us what the benefit of that is and why you might have switched the formula.
Yeah, so the benefit was that we really thought that there was an entirely new way to grow really high quality protein, which is focused on fungi. Mm-hmm. So koji and yeast are both fungi, not mushrooms, but part of that same kingdom of life. Both koji and yeast have about 40% protein. A good steak has about 30% protein. And so this was a really great way of getting around where do you get that protein from, basically. Mm-hmm. And so the answer was actually from fungi. But we had a really interesting insight early on from our customers. Turns out that, there's this saying, and I don't know who it comes from, but very little survives your first interaction with the marketplace, right?
Yeah, it's like, no business plan survives first contact with reality.
Exactly. Yeah. And reality is the marketplace.
Right.
And so once we started selling our products to consumers, it became very clear that consumers didn't know what koji was. They actually thought it was a goji berry often. So they were like, oh yeah, I love those goji berries. I eat them all the time. And we realized that actually consumers understood what plant-based was. They didn't understand what fungi-based was. And so we really changed the way that we described our product. Our product is still a product of science. It's something that we looked at the latest in nutritional science. We worked with our chief veterinarian, Dr. Ernie Ward, to develop it. And we worked with a lot of other scientists and nutritionists to reimagine food with today's 21st century science. So looking at things like the microbiome, looking at newer ingredients, things that we knew had health benefits around it.
So is koji still playing a role?
It is. So it still plays a role, particularly for its prebiotic effect.
I see.
We have it within our treats and also within our food.
And is it just a smaller portion of it?
A smaller portion of it, yeah.
Got it.
And what we found is that it primarily, we actually think yeast is an even better source for protein. So we use yeast as a primary protein source. And then we also use a lot of plant proteins and plant carbohydrates as well.
So I think I've heard you say before, like a primary ingredient is a nutritional yeast, right?
Yes, exactly.
Which, as you know, Ryan, I am an avid fan of nutritional yeast. I consume it every day of my life. Yep. I have often thought that if there is some type of post-apocalyptic world that I have survived, one of the things I will miss most about civilization is the existence of nutritional yeast. It would be horrible. It would be, I would give up lots before I would give it up. So, but for folks who aren't initiated, they don't know about the wonders of nutritional yeast. Just briefly tell us, what is it and why is it so important that you're making it a primary ingredient?
So nutritional yeast has a whole host, as the name itself describes. Yeast itself is a very nutritious food. We, humanity, and our pets have been consuming it literally for thousands of years. The Romans would actually march with sourdough. And so the sourdough bread, actually the yeast would transform a less nutritional bread into a high nutritional value. So high amounts of vitamins, more minerals, and then just more protein as well.
Mm-hmm. So, but that's a sourdough yeast, but we're talking about nutritional yeast here specifically. So tell us about nutritional yeast.
High in B vitamins. I mean, there's a whole host of it actually. So actually, one of the interesting things when you look at nutritional yeast and humans and our pets and dogs is that we have umami receptors. We both have savory receptors. And so the dogs and us love the savoriness because it's high protein. So the yeast itself, and I mentioned that a little bit earlier, is high in protein, and it has a diverse amount of amino acids. So what's really important in the protein that we and our pets consume is the quality of and diversity of the amino acids within the proteins, not its actual source, whether it's plant or fungi or animal.
Interesting. Yeah. And I think, to clear up some misconceptions about it, nutritional yeast is an inactive yeast. So it's dead yeast.
Yes,
so
you're not getting any yeast infections.
Right. Yes.
That has nothing to do with the yeast that we consume.
It needs a new name.
Yeah.
One of the issues, people have suggested all these names for nutritional yeast because it sounds repulsive.
Yeah.
Nutritional yeast it's like the worst of both worlds. And so people have suggested noosh for it, which I think sounds pretty bad as well.
I've heard people use that word before. I think for those that are not familiar with the nooch.
No, I have a better one, I think.
Oh,
Here, I'm going to put it out to the world right now.
Yeah, what's I'm ready.
I would just call it Golden Flakes.
I like Golden Flakes.
Yeah,
it's beautiful.
Yeah, who wouldn't want Golden Flakes on their food? It's like a high-class meal.
I may start adapting Golden Flakes.
Yeah,
it's like
good.
It's Golden Flakes.
Yeah. On the ingredient label, Golden Flakes, you can put parentheses whatever the Latin name of the organism is, but just Golden Flakes. I
put nutritional yeast on my food all the time.
Yeah,
I love it, and it's just so fantastic for a whole host of reasons.
It's high in protein. It's often fortified with B12. I mean, it's
full of vitamins and minerals. It's just an incredible superfood.
It really is.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I hope that this will spark a revolution in the naming of this, because Golden Flakes would be a big improvement and will probably lead to higher adoption of it. Okay, so you now have started Wild Earth, Ryan.
Yes.
You've got this company.
Yep.
You're making pet food that you're basing it on yeast and other healthy ingredients.
Yep.
You have had a tremendous ride, right?
It's been a wild ride. I mean,
you've raised from billionaires like Peter Thiel, Mark Cuban on Shark Tank.
Yep.
You were on Shark Tank, and you were one of the half of participants who actually got a deal.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
And that was a very tough deal. And Mark keeps me on my toes on a weekly basis still.
Cool. How nervous were you when you went out there?
Super nervous. Like, it's really hard to describe. A lot of people think that it's just a room, but it's actually a studio. So you're pitching, the sharks are trying to put you off because they want something that's very memorable for the camera. They're not going to stop rolling. So if you trip and fall, that's how you go out. Like, that's how you trip and fall. They're going to show that because it's kind of entertaining for the audience. It's a show, after all. It's a live show. It's not a live show. It's a film show, but it's a real show. And there's just people like moving cameras around, moving sound equipment. So it's a very distracting place to pitch.
Mm-hmm. When you were there, presumably you were, choking, you're feeling like you're going to just, I can imagine what it would be like to be walking out onto that stage. So you indicated that you were really nervous. What did you do? I know that you're a practitioner of meditation. Was that part of your preparation for this?
I meditated a lot. And actually even before going in, just trying to clear my mind and get myself, sometimes I use what's called anchoring. And so anchoring is a practice that's used both by athletes and also by people who actually perform on stage. They anchor themselves in an emotional state. So it's basically doing a motion. I kind of just hold both my hands and push them down and getting myself into a mental state of when I was very successful, reminding myself of that. And then I also meditate as well. So it's an anchoring of emotional state and meditation.
So is that what you were doing immediately before walking out?
Literally, that's so literally before I walked out, I anchored myself. So I'd meditated before. You're waiting there to be called and for those big doors to open. And I kind of did this small movement, which I always do before a really big meeting. And I get myself into an emotional state and say, this is going to be as successful as, and I just remember something very successful that I've done in the past. And then I walk out with confidence and in that emotional state.
Yeah, it's amazing how different your mental state will affect what actually happens.
It really is.
It's truly incredible.
And I was going on stage knowing full well at that time. So this was actually the end of 2018. We hadn't launched a product. We had raised a bunch of money, and we'd spent a lot of money on R&D, and we had no sales. right? And so I was going there with literally all the cardinal sins of Shark Tank that you don't do, and a high valuation.
High valuation, zero revenue, no product. That's awesome. What could go wrong?
What could go wrong? I was like, okay, well, it turned out it was about 3.6 million people across the US saw me that night. I was like, well, as long as I don't look like a total and utter fool, that'll have been a win. And it turned out actually to have been really a pivotal moment for Wild Earth as a brand that really, we went overnight. We became a brand that was recognized across the US and a company that was recognized across the US, which is something that we needed to have happen to be a successful dog food company.
And how much have you raised so far in total?
So total, we've raised $16 million.
So here you are, the CEO now of this company. It's raised $16 million.
Yep.
You have 20 people working at the company now. You presumably in the last couple of years of doing this have learned quite a lot. What would you say to the Ryan of 2 years ago if you could go back and talk to him?
I would say get to the market as quickly as possible. I always thought I understood that. And now I really understand that. The marketplace will teach you so much. So the sooner you can try your prototypes out, the sooner you can talk to your customers, the better. Make the prototypes as early as you can and get feedback early on. I think that was one of our big challenges because we didn't know how people would interact with our product. Even just how we'd call our product would have been very helpful.
Yeah, that reminds me a little bit of what Reid Hoffman has said, where he famously says that, if you're not embarrassed of the first product that you've released and you released it too late, you need to release it soon.
And by the way, that's hard because a lot of people don't want to release embarrassing products. Yeah. And it's also hard if you are a food company because you have to release something that's safe. And so, for us, one of the big challenges, and this was a learning for me, I didn't realize how hard it would be to design a full and complete food for dogs. It's actually a lot of deep science.
I've looked into a little bit to the AAFCO standards. It's like the body that determines the nutritional standards for pet food. And it's amazing actually how strict it is. Compared to like if you're making food for humans, you can basically do whatever you want. I mean, in terms of the nutritional content of the food. But for pet food, it's surprisingly high.
Yeah, because it's not nutritionally complete. So the really important thing is if you're making a dog food or cat food, it has to have essential nutrients. And it's hard to balance the essential nutrients plus a cost, which is going to be competitive in the marketplace. And so that's always one of the big challenging things. I mean, for us, we erred on the side of higher quality ingredients and higher price than lower quality ingredients, lower price.
What's the differential in price, let's say, between Wild Earth and like a mainstream, like Purina type dog food? Like, is it twice as expensive?
It's probably 20 to 30% more expensive.
That's it.
Yeah. I mean, it's things like, where we get our vitamin and mineral premixes, or the quality of the certain types of potato protein that we get.
I mean, if you look at Beyond Meat or Impossible Foods, they're often selling for like 300, 400% the cost of commodity beef. And if you're only at 20 or 30% higher than conventional dog food, that actually seems like not that high of a disparity relative to other plant-based options.
True. But the challenge is that it's a highly competitive marketplace. And so one of the big challenges is that even when you're only a little, 20 to 30% higher, there are a lot of consumers that are used to getting very inexpensive dog food. And so, that's just not something we can compete with yet.
So is your target audience people who are eating plant-based themselves?
No, actually. So this is very interesting. So we grew, we're not disclosing yet our financials, but like in 2019, we grew 50% month on month, which was very, very fast. We learned a lot through that. One of the interesting things that we learned was just the sheer size of the potential market for plant-based dog food. We had a lot of people who were feeding Blue Buffalo, Purina, Pedigree, Acana, Origin, raw meat. We're switching over. And I talk to a lot of our customers, and I always make my email available, ryan@wildearth.com. I always want to hear from our customers.
Yeah. On the 23rd episode of this show, Josh Tetrick made his email available during the show. And he later told me that he received more than 50 emails from people who are listening. So,
wow.
So we'll see how many people contact you. Ryan@wildearth.com.
Let's see if I can beat Josh's total. Yeah. So basically, no, and I do that on purpose. I want to hear from our customers. I think that's the most important thing that a CEO can do, is really be as connected to your customers as possible. We have tens of thousands of customers. And so I always want to hear from them when there's something that's not quite right or something we can change, or even ideas on how to make new products. That's been a huge journey and a huge learning. I'm trying to think in terms of like other kind of deep insights on the marketplace. We're just not, we are not for people who are plant-based, vegan, or vegetarian. We're for everyone. And so what we're finding is that people will move over from like raw meat. That was actually the most surprising. So when I talked to our raw meat customers who switched over to Wild Earth, I was like, you do realize that we're a plant-based product? Like, yeah, we've been looking for clean protein. These are actually people who are very, very informed, who actually read about the FDA recalls of pet food and actually don't want to feed their dogs contaminated meat or other, issues that they found in the supply chain.
Do you think that they are feeding their dogs exclusively Wild Earth? No.
And in fact, what we found is that so that there are a bunch of megatrends that are affecting the pet food space. And so it's a huge space. It accounts for about 30% of the meat consumption in the US. And by the way, it's growing even faster globally. So China and India are growing about 20% every year. And actually China is on pace, I believe, this year to outpace for total number of pet dogs, outpace the US. Wow. So to become the largest market for dog food. So I think that they are, they are definitely mixing different products. We'll often find that they'll say, hey, I love Wild Earth. I mix in a little healthy fish every once in a while, little chicken. And so this humanization trend is that people are feeding their dogs better, higher quality food because they're family members. And so they're focused on their health.
Yeah. One of my pet peeves, pun intended, is the thought that dogs or cats for that matter should eat the same food every meal, which just seems so boring. And it seems like no human wants to do that. You don't want to eat the same thing for dinner that you had for lunch, let alone eat the same meal every day. And I'm not trying to say that they have the same exact interests that we do, but these are animals who evolved with a much more diverse diet than what they currently eat.
Most definitely.
And I do think there's probably a sense of boredom as being a really big animal welfare problem for pets, especially like indoor animals only. And I'm not advocating for outdoor cats, but I am saying that the idea that they have such monotonous lives is very troubling to me, including in their diet and in their behavior and all that. And so when I had a dog named George, who was a very cute three-legged pit bull, I always tried to feed him different things. Like I tried lots of different dogs' food, fed him lots of types of foods that I was eating myself. And so I felt like he had a well-rounded diet because he wasn't eating the same thing every single meal. I'm sure you would prefer for them to eat Wild Earth every meal, but you'll have to come up with a suite of products so they can vary between them.
Honestly, that's the direction that we're going in, Paul. So I do think diversity in diet is actually a very good thing for dogs. I highly encourage it, and we encourage it. So often what a lot of the pet parents that are customers will do is they will use our dog food as a base. It's really important to get enough vitamins and minerals and enough amino acid, the right amino acid profile for dogs. But then adding in extras, like fresh greens or some fruits, dogs, some like apples, bananas. I love giving apples, bananas, and sometimes, and I know soy is not popular. I think soy is fantastic. I think dogs love soy. They actually love tofu. So I also feed a little tofu too. I'm like you, Paul. Like I think that dogs should have variety in their meals, but I think that it is important that they have a base food that is nutritionally complete.
Yeah, for sure. I'm with you. So let's just look at the big picture, Ryan. There's so many people who want to change the world. They want to do something good for the planet, for animals, or for whatever it is that they care about. You have chosen from really the beginning of your career to use business as an opportunity to thrust the issues that you're concerned about into the limelight and into making real progress. What would you recommend? Like, why have you chosen that as opposed to any other pathway that you might have chosen to make a change in the world?
I think it's because I once had advice in terms of, I was asking various different successful people, what should I do with my life? And the feedback that I got was, do something that even if no one paid you to do it, you would still do it. And for me, that's been the most powerful advice. It's like, ultimately, if I never make a dime off of doing the things that I do, would I spend my time doing them? The answer is yes. Wild Earth, even if we hadn't raised money, I would still be grinding away trying to build Wild Earth because I believe it's right for our pets and for the planet.
Yeah. I can't believe that I am fortunate enough to actually make a salary trying to make the world a better place. It's surreal to me, actually.
It's amazing, right? Yeah. I mean, it's I have a lot of gratitude. And so I focus on my meditation practice around gratitude. I have a lot of gratitude that we can do this, that we have the ability to live in such a great country that allows us the freedom to do things that we care about. There are many other people who don't have that opportunity. And so I'm thankful. I'm thankful for friends like you, Paul. I'm thankful for this entire community. I'm thankful for the people that support us, right? When you look at people who are out there and literally don't make a dime, who are activists or who are doing really important work that doesn't pay, I'm grateful for them too.
Sure. Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned gratitude. My wife, Tony, turned me on to an app called Happy Feed, which is a free app where basically it just prompts you every day to, at the end of the day, put down 3 things that happened that day for which you're grateful. And it's really helpful. So I use it every night. And it's helpful because once you start doing it for a while and you notice, then you go throughout your day scanning, looking for things to be grateful for, because like, I'm going to have to do this tonight. Yeah. And you can go back and look and say, like 2 years ago, this is what I was grateful for. And you go back and you remember the things that actually made you happy, because being grateful obviously is shown to be one of the greatest ways to make yourself happier. Yeah. And so I use Happy Feed and encourage others too as well. Because it's really, amazing. It's very simple. Yeah. It's maybe 1 minute a day, just write 3 things that you were grateful for that day, but it's actually quite helpful in changing the way that you view the world.
I love that. I love that suggestion. Yeah. I mean, and talking about apps, Calm app is something that I use regularly.
I heard they just raised a huge amount.
Yeah. It's funny. It's funny, right? Meditation can be lucrative.
Yeah, that's right.
It's a very weird thing.
It's like you have Beyond and Impossible and Calm and Headspace.
Yeah, Exactly. So, I mean, I don't know. Maybe we're in a unique moment in our world that, concepts that are good for people, good for the animals, good for the planet, can exist. And that's a really exciting thing. I noticed actually just recently, a day or two ago, Jeff Bezos announced that he's devoting $10 billion of his own money to fighting climate change.
It's great.
Right? It's an amazing thing.
Yeah.
I know that he gets attacked for obviously some of the practices at Amazon that he definitely needs to do better at. But the thing is, it's still an incredible thing. Yeah,
I mean, just to keep it real, I mean, $10 billion is probably up maybe even near 10% of his total wealth. Yeah. How many people are giving 10% of their wealth away? Now, admittedly, he's still got like 90 some billion. So, to him, it doesn't actually change anything of his day-to-day life. But I do think it's pretty admirable for anybody to give away 10% of everything they have. Now, I mean, you could say, well, when you have that much, you should give away 99%, which frankly, I would agree with. But still, it's, among the most amazing things that anyone has done, really.
Yeah. And it's like, it's very easy to criticize people. It's much harder to actually be the one doing the hard things.
Yeah. And I guess I should back up because I presume a lot of his wealth is in Amazon stock, which is important for him functionally to have as well. So, I take back the 99% comment. But if it was all cash, that wasn't for sure. Yeah. But I mean, you're not going to find me criticizing. I often will comment that it's much easier for people who aren't on the field to know how the people on the field ought to be playing. Yeah. They'll say, oh, why didn't he run that way? Why didn't they throw to that person? Why didn't they didn't see that hole? It's like, well, when you're on the field, it looks a lot different. You don't know what it's like until you're on the field, for sure.
I have a lot of empathy for people who are trying to create change in the world. It is not easy. Yeah. And so, I have a general belief that most people are good people. And so that's whenever, a Twitter war starts up or whatever else, like I will usually side with the concept that person is a good person, even if they've made a mistake. Right. And so, because I think it's too easy to go the other way around. It's like, oh, that's a bad person. Well, that's a bad person. That's a bad person. It's humanity as a whole is generally good. Like that is my belief. And that's something I'm going to stick to probably till the end of my days. I love my life in humanity because of it. I don't want to hate humanity. And so I think that, your perspective on how you view things is very powerful. I think that it is a much stronger place to start from interacting even with, your quote unquote enemies from a perspective of they are fundamentally a good person. They just disagree with you in certain areas.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Lincoln quote that the best way to destroy an enemy is to make him your friend.
Yeah, it's a great quote.
Yeah. So Ryan, wrapping up here, if there are people who look and say, this Ryan Bethencourt dude looks like he's really doing awesome things, I would like to try to do something. Yeah. Maybe they don't want to start a pet food company, maybe they do, but what resources would you recommend to them, whether books or any other resources that have been helpful to you that you think that they would benefit from consuming?
Yeah, so I think that there's a wealth of books that I highly recommend that they start at. Usually it's actually probably better to look at the autobiographies of people who've done great things that you admire, whoever that person is. Start there and start to understand who they are. I voraciously consume content now, whether it's podcasts, whether it's audiobooks, whether it's actual books, historical autobiographies, history, art. So I think that there are many starting places. I'm trying to think. One of the most powerful books, and I know this is controversial, but I don't shy away from controversy, is Peter Thiel's 0 to 1.
Yes.
For me, Peter Thiel actually really deeply understands the challenge of going from 0, nothing, an idea, to 1, which is something. And so the insights you get there can be very counterintuitive from his book, and I highly recommend it.
Great. Okay. Well, we'll include a link to that in the show notes for sure. So finally, Ryan, if there are people out there who are thinking, I'd really like to make a difference in the world, I too want to start my own company. Are there any ideas that you have for businesses that you're not pursuing that you wish that somebody else would?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. Yes. So let me think about that. So I think that there is still an incredible amount of opportunity within the plant-based space. I think we're only just at the beginning of the beginning. I think that there's an incredible amount of opportunity in the cell-based meat space. We still haven't solved the structured meat problem. And that's something that I think there would be dozens more companies that will evolve. I think that wherever you are in the world, if you're listening to this podcast, there's an opportunity to create a national champion within your city or within your country that moves these concepts forward. What I love is people are like, oh, Beyond Meat has done the burger thing, so there will never be another Beyond Meat. And then Futuro Burger pops up in Brazil, right? And takes Brazil by storm. And it's like, literally, that's not true. It's like, there's tons of opportunity.
What's also so funny to think about is, people are like, oh, well, you have it Beyond and Impossible. Well, it still is less than 1% of the meat market.
Yeah.
You look at like plant-based milk, it's 13% of the fluid milk market. Well, plant-based meat is still less than 1% of all meat sold. So these are great companies. They're huge compared to 0 for sure.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that the space is saturated by any means.
No.
I mean, there's room for McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, Arby's, Sonic, Denny's, and so on. Like you go on and on and on, all these fast food companies. And there's room for all of them. So surely there's room for lots of these plant-based meat companies, lots of room for cultivated meat companies, for sure.
And just one thing that I'll add to that in terms of if you're looking for space to build in, biology is infinite. And so I say that because within every unique thing we find in biology, there are industries hidden within that. I'll give you one example. We now know that biology harnesses quantum effects, right, to do things, to capture photons in the chlorophyll molecule, to give us literally life on this planet, right? So the chlorophyll molecule in plants harnesses lights using quantum effects. Fascinating. That's room temperature quantum mechanics. There are literally industries within that. And throughout biology, there are examples of biology using quantum effects. We don't know what industries that will.
Could you think of one?
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of room temperature, quantum computation, right? I actually think that you could actually look at the way that biology harnesses quantum effects and probably design better, cheaper, room temperature, growable quantum machines. I know it sounds like science fiction, but the thing is the effects already happen. And so I know we're going way outside of the world of food, but when I think about biology, I think about the industries that exist, from biomaterials to storing digital data and DNA to the food that we eat and to our bodies as well.
Cool. Well, hopefully that will be sufficient to inspire somebody to do something in the biological space. Yeah. And if they do, you have a new cell valley where they can come and get started about, right?
Yes, we have a little incubator space here where we rent out lab space. So obviously Wild Earth is now a fully commercial company and we're scaling and growing. We're actually, just to give everyone an idea of size, so we're about a 2-year-old company. We are nationwide, in all 50 states. And we actually have 60 stores and some exciting partnerships, retail partnerships we're going to be announcing very soon. And so we still want to give back to the community. And so we have space here that we are looking to rent out and obviously provide some guidance for fledgling entrepreneurs that need it. So feel free to contact us, cellvalleylabs.com. And then also, if you are curious about pet food, just a quick shout out on the Clean Pet Food Revolution book that we just launched. So you're welcome to check it out. It's on Amazon. And I'm going to be giving Paul his copy right afterwards.
I cannot wait. I'm very honored. I think I have a blurb on the book or on the website.
You do. I think it's in the book too.
Okay, very cool. I'm greatly honored, and I can't wait to have my own copy in the flesh here. So Ryan Bethencourt, I am rooting for you. I'm impressed by everything that you've done so far. How old are you?
Well, now I'm 40 years old.
40. All right. Very cool. Yes. I too am a 40-year-old.
All right.
You know what? I like to think of both you and me as maybe only about 45% done with our lives. So maybe you think you're going to live much longer. I don't know.
Hopefully, let's see where we go, right? Let's see where we end up.
But it's pretty impressive to me, all that you've accomplished in those first 4 decades. And I'm very excited to see what the next 4 hold for you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for everything and all your support.
All right, Ryan, I've seen the ads so many times watching you eat Wild Earth out of a bowl like it was cereal. Now I'm going to get to try some as well. Right. Here we go. We'll try it. You can hear it pouring out here. Got a couple pieces. Looks very good. Feels nice, firm to the touch here. Okay. All right, that's good. You know what I would do with this? And first of all, it tastes good. I like it. What I would do is I would put it like as a crouton on salad. That would be like a good use for this. So if you have any trouble marketing it for people with pets, you have a crouton business.
Yes. Well, and the sharks loved it too, right? On Shark Tank, all the sharks ate it too. So.
I feel so cool.
Thanks for listening. We hope you found use in this episode. If so, don't keep it to yourself. Please leave us a 5-star rating on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. And as always, we hope you will be in the business of doing good.